Welcome to the Around the Republic podcast. I'm your host, Brian Nichols, Associate Editor at the Libertarian Republic. And today, I am joined by one of our finest liberty heroes over at the Libertarian Republic, and that is none other than TLR Contributor Paul Meekin. What's up, man?
Nothing. Just staying back and seeing all the news that came out today. It was a rough day in American
to say the
stuff.
least.
Yeah,
to say the least. Today was like an absolutely atrocious day in the news cycle. I mean, like, and we're gonna get into more detail, but obviously the breaking news of the day was the shooting that happened there over in Virginia and Alexandria, where a gentleman who, I mean, there's no other way to put it. He was a deranged individual. You know, I don't even want to get into the politics of it. He was just anti-Trump and Republican movement. Went out with a rifle and started shooting at the Republican charity baseball team, and ultimately ended up hitting and severely injuring Representative Majority Whip there, Steve Scalise, shot in the hip, who is now still in critical condition. But we'll get into that in a second. But because obviously that's going to be a lot more in-depth detail that we're going to go into. But Paul, I mean, what's your day been like besides having to go through and wade through this nonstop, political just turmoil and this nasty news that's happening, and just the downtroddenness that we've had today in the 14th?
Well, it was, I came in, like, I do a lot of my writing, like, on my off time at my day job. So, like, I emailed our editor-in-chief, or I texted him. I'm like, hey, Cody, just letting you know, I have, like, 5 video game reviews I have to do today. So I'm just going to write them all up, and then you can publish them whenever. I mean, they're not really liberty-focused. Oh, my God, here's the guy's Facebook.
Yep.
And then I was in that, and then I was back writing about politics, and it's important work. But I was excited to talk about Tropico 5 at the time, but that's another story for another day. When we have less serious topics to discuss. But otherwise, it's just been reading about this and seeing just the brutal and depressing reaction to it in the media and from people we're supposed to look up to.
Indeed.
And it not to use a cliche, it breaks my heart.
Yep.
I know Alex Jones is probably the worst example as someone to look to, but right after it happened, I saw a leftist crazy person shoots at GOP, and then I saw people saying, "Oh, this smashes the narrative. This smashes the narrative." I'm like, you're treating this like a victory for your political cause, and that's like, and I understand, like, you want to know a person's politics, and I guess it gives a person pause when the person that commits like such a horrible act goes against what our general thoughts and stereotypes of what someone like this would be.
Right.
But, like, don't treat it as a victory. Don't treat it as a celebration of, look, we're not all crazy. Anybody can be a mass shooter. There are an endless number of reasons for why you would want to kill someone. And there are endless number of reasons of why you don't. And those are the reasons people don't. You could be the kind of person that takes that picture of Kathy Griffin holding up the severed Trump head, post it on your Facebook every single day. You hate Donald Trump, but you're not supposed to kill the guy or kill people that support him.
Right.
So whatever is wrong with this guy, the politics isn't the cause, it's a reason. And when you're sick, you can find any reason you want. What was that guy in California? He blamed his virginity on it and that he couldn't get a date, and he killed 4 people and injured like 12 others or something.
And you're referring to the shooting at the UPS store facility out there in San Francisco, where he went in and he shot all these employees that were there, killing 3, and then he himself ultimately deceased as well. I mean, like you said, this day has been nothing but just tragedy. I mean, I started the day today. It's my mom's birthday. Here I am. I give a phone call to Mama Nichols. I mean, it's Flag Day as well. Oh, it's also Donald Trump's birthday. So. Way to go, Mama Nichols, for sharing a birthday with Donald Trump. I talked to her, and all happy and chipper on my way to work, and then all of a sudden I get to work, and my phone's blowing up, and I get all these breaking news about a shooting happening where they're saying Steve Scalise is shot, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what's happening? And then you come to find out, the severity and the scope of how bad this was. I mean, the fact that there was not more casualties is truly a blessing. I mean, I'm stunned that nothing more truly happened with the amount of elected officials who are there at that one spot there for the charity baseball game. But before we get into more detail about that, first and foremost, want to do a big thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us again for this week's podcast. You've made it over a month into our podcast. You haven't said goodbye to us yet, and for that we are eternally grateful. And just a reminder for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Around the Republic podcast, we're a part of the former Libertarian presidential candidate Austin Peterson's Libertarian Republic empire. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please go ahead, click that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please share the podcast in whatever means, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, you name it, whatever social media you got, share it. And if you are a liberty-loving individual out there, you want to get some more, liberty throughout your day, I cannot recommend enough Austin Peterson's his own podcast that he hosts, The Freedom Report. He'll do that live, usually on Facebook Live, and then upload the podcast to your pod streaming apps. And if you do end up going to check out the Freedom Report, please leave a little comment there for Austin. Tell him that we sent you over from the Around the Republic podcast. And then finally, if you really do love hearing what Paul and I are going to be talking about today, and you love our perspectives and you want to hear more, feel free to go ahead and give us a follow on our social media accounts, and more specifically Twitter. I know Twitter is where I always go ahead and engage more, with my followers. So you can go ahead and find me at B Nichols Liberty, and you can go ahead and find Paul at Meekin on Movies. And with that, let's go ahead and get right into, like we said, the main discussion of the day, which is this shooting over in Alexandria. And like we alluded to at the beginning of the program, House Majority Whip Steve Scalise was shot as well. I believe four other individuals, including Capitol Hill Police. Steve Scalise, shot in the hip, is currently in critical condition. And the shooter, whose name we will not, say here on the podcast, because we've come to the conclusion that he doesn't deserve any more notoriety for what he has done. But the shooter, he was a Bernie Sanders volunteer, which, in my opinion, has no relevance whatsoever to the shooting at this point in time. And Paul, like you alluded to, bad people are going to do bad things. I don't think that their connection with someone else, unless the other organization told them or incentivized them to do something bad, that relationship should have no bearing whatsoever. Just like a fanatical Muslim, no way, shape, or form represents the entire Islamic religion. Just like Westboro Baptist Church does not represent the entire Christian religion. I don't believe that this shooter today, he does not represent Bernie Sanders. He does not represent, quote unquote, the resistance. He represents a bad person who did a bad thing, who, yes, believed a certain political ideology, and he promoted that ideology very openly. But I think we can all come to the conclusion that this man was not well, and as such, he did some terrible things. And thankfully, nobody ended up passing away from this besides him. So, Paul, kind of give me your overall perspective of the day. Looking at the shooting itself, the aftermath, the political reactions that followed afterwards as well. Just kind of give me your Spark Notes recap of today's events.
Yeah, so, hold on one second. All right, we're good. So, essentially what happened, regarding my perspective is the first thing I see when I get up this morning is a Facebook message saying, hey, can you write about the shooting? I'm like, what shooting? I didn't know, and then I saw. I'm like, okay, there's a shooting in Washington. Oh, my gosh, it was at the GOP. And then I got into work and saw a little more. We got information on who this person was. And then I started to look a little bit more into the representative that was, shot and injured and is currently in critical condition, unfortunately.
And really quick, who is not only just a representative, he's not just, your average.
Whip, right?
Yeah, he's the House Majority Whip, which, is one of the top ranking positions in any congressional, leadership role. He is at the top. He's up there with, the Kevin McCarthy, the Paul Ryan. So his status alone is shocking, to say the least.
Yeah, and I was reading into him, and like the cynical part of my brain is like, oh no, the first, not to get into politics, but you have to because it's what's going to happen. The second something like this happens, we're going to start talking about gun control. We're going to start talking about the current state of political discourse. We're going to start talking about mental health, although that hasn't really come out as much as it should at this time. And so I looked into the representative, and he has, a right wing voting record as far as the eye can see. He voted against the Violence Against Women Act. He voted to keep marriage between a man and a woman, both federally and at the state level. And I was waiting. I was waiting for some jerk to write a story about his record and how, it's a national tragedy that some anti-gay guy got shot. And inevitably, it was on Twitter. I'm like, okay, this is where we're at right now. And then someone revealed his name, and someone sent the guy's Facebook to me.
His personal Facebook, correct?
His personal Facebook, and because I think he was 66 years old, so he didn't know how to set his Facebook to private. So all of the stuff he's ever posted,
yep, everything
is on there, and it's just stuff about socialism, which is fine. You're allowed to have these beliefs. I don't have a problem with that. But the really disheartening part was that because his Facebook was public, it was just open season on the comments section. It was like, oh, looks like you're going to be someone's B word in prison, you B word, you socialist scum, and all this like really just gross vitriolic like gunk that just made the whole situation even worse. Like the shooting is tragic enough, and that people on the internet are so eager to just kind of vindicate themselves by putting someone else down just made it worse and more depressing.
Let me hop in with Paul.
Yeah.
I'm for my own curiosity. The only thing I saw in terms of his actual status right now was from a statement by President Trump saying that the shooter is dead. Has that been confirmed? I haven't seen that anywhere else. Do we know if is that confirmed 100%?
Trump said he's dead. I don't know if he's dead. It was really weird because like one of the first photos we saw of him was like his mugshot from 2006 when he was arrested for battery.
Right.
I'm like, oh, hey, they got him alive. How about that? And then it turns out we didn't because that mugshot is old. So yeah, I don't know if he said. I'm assuming if Trump said it, it's probably true. That doesn't seem like something he would make up.
Right. So I was genuinely curious because I hadn't seen anything else besides the statement from the president. Which I mean, now this is my conspiracy brain working because I just finished watching House of Cards a couple weeks ago, this new season, and like for those of you who have not watched it yet, I'm not gonna make any spoilers. But there's one scene where there's a guy that they're quote unquote looking for. And they believe that they're going to find him, and then it turns out that they've had him all along, and then the president orders him dead. I mean, so for me, I don't want to say that the conspiracy is something that I would embrace, but it's definitely something that you raise your eyebrows and you say, well, is he really dead, or has Trump ordered him dead? Like, how did that work out? But I'm not going to go on that kind of a conspiracy tangent.
Yeah, and I mean, in that show, the reason they had him alive is so they could perpetuate a witch hunt, and I think Donald Trump saying he's dead and then having him being alive doesn't really serve any purpose other than...
I just had to
like, because then he's miraculous. Yeah.
I
that last
wasn't
season...
sure.
Go on, I'm sorry.
No, I honestly, that the only place I had seen anything with regards to the current status of the shooter was from a statement from President Trump. So that's why I was genuinely curious as to if, when you wrote this article, with regards to examining the shooter himself, is there anything that we know more of in terms of his current status besides what we learned from the president of the United States? But anyways, no, I mean, you bring up a really good point in terms of his current background. That we know of at this point in terms of him being, a socialist, being an anti-Trump, I wouldn't even say never Trump. He was more never Trump. He was
destroy Trump.
Destroy Trump. Like the guy had this mindset that Trump essentially was the incarnation of the devil himself. And there definitely was something wrong with him. Because we've been able to watch individuals on the left who have firmly taken a never Trump position. They have joined what they call the hashtag resistance. But this is to the furthest extent we've seen someone take action against an elected official. I think back to the most recent shooting that comes to mind was back in, I think it was 2011 with Gabby Giffords. back in it when she was shot during a rally. So, I mean, like you said though, I mean, all the anti-gun propaganda now is coming out of the woodwork, and one particular anti-gun propagandist that came out is the senior editor from The Atlantic, David Frum.
Oh.
And yeah, this is just a gem here. He tweets, Virginia, no background checks, no licensing, no registration, no permit required for concealed carry of long guns. I'm sorry, open carry long guns and handguns, which first and foremost, the latter part of that is absolutely asinine, because how the hell are you going to try to conceal carry a rifle? I mean, I'm not sure if he understands the basics of physics in terms of a gun being upwards of sometimes 3 feet long. It's kind of hard to conceal that on your person. And he faced backlash instantly from his tweet. I mean, among them, Charles Cook from National Review saying, hey, by the way, there are background checks in Virginia. And then he also pointed out, and you don't need concealed carry with long guns. And then asked, why do you never do any research? And that was just the tip of the iceberg in terms of people going after Frum, because I think we can both agree that was nothing but an opportunist looking for an instance of tragedy to then build upon his narrative, and to use the tragedy to promote and really project to a larger audience that otherwise he probably wouldn't have. But just in order to go forward with his narrative, facts be damned.
Yeah, and the thing is, the guy isn't even from Virginia. He's from Illinois.
Right.
And Illinois requires you to have a permit unless you're buying a gun from a gun show.
Right.
So, I mean, and this, the thing with gun control is, what is it Charlton Heston used to say? If you outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns.
Right.
And it's a catchy catchphrase, and coming from the left side of things, I think, if you need, and I'm not like a crazy I hate to use the word crazy, but I'm not the kind of person that says we don't need driver's licenses. I think if you're going to be in charge of a piece of machinery that could really harm others, I do think it's not beyond the realm of reason to have some sort of ideally standardized licensing or permit or background check process. And I know that kind of is anti-liberty, but it seems like a compromise I would hope people are willing to make. I'm fine with whatever guns people want to have. If you want to have an AR-15, if you want to have a whatever, that's cool. That's fine. But I want to make sure that you've been trained to be a responsible gun owner. And even then, even if you're trained to be a responsible gun owner, doesn't necessarily mean you are. There are plenty of people with driver's licenses who have killed people. There are plenty of people with driver's licenses who have drunk driven or used their car as a weapon. So it's a tricky thing.
Yeah, and so now, see, this is where, like you said, you're coming from more of I'll say reformed leftist. And I'm coming from more of a reformed Republican, almost like born again. We both been born again, but in different perspectives into libertarianism, where I'm looking at this, and you bring up an interesting point, and I often hear this argument raised by those on the left, which no, I'm not trying to poke fun, but it makes sense that you're making this argument. Is that cars, for instance, that's the idea of it's a privilege, that you have a license to drive a car because you want to make sure you can use the car appropriately, and I get that makes sense, and that's a valid argument. The difference, though, and this is where constitutionalists will come and point to our Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights it's not simply laws passed by Congress to be amended unless in certain circumstances. It's not like you can go ahead and just on a whim change the Bill of Rights. It requires a very intensive amendment process. And the 2/3 of I think it's 2/3 of the states, or no, 2/3 of the Congress, 3/4 of the states have to agree to amend the Constitution, and in that we have the Second Amendment right, which says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I personally don't look at the words "the right to bear arms shall not be infringed" to be radical. And to take that a step further, I also think that also defeats the argument with regards to comparing weapons such as guns that we're talking about right now, as it's prevalent with this case. I don't think it's fair to compare guns to cars because weapons have one purpose, and that is to kill. I mean, whether it's to kill someone or in terms of attack or in terms of defense. Cars, that's not the intended purpose of a car, no more than it is for an airplane, no more than it is for a knife, no more than it is for a pressure cooker. The outcome from using those devices in a negative way can result in death. However, that's not their primary goal as a tool. Whereas a gun, like I said, the entire goal of a gun when in use is designed to kill. So with that being said, I understand the argument that you're making that licensing to make sure individuals who should be able to use guns are able to use guns, but we know that they can. Versus John Doe, who's never shot a gun in his life, goes to Walmart, buys a hunting rifle, never shot it in his life, never took a training course in his life, and then just goes out and uses it recklessly, or God forbid uses it to harm other people. The difference, though, I think, is that we do have pretty universal background checks in place already at state levels. I mean, I'm not a huge Steven Crowder fan for Loudworth Crowder, but
oh gosh, yeah.
But he does a phenomenal piece in which he points out how difficult it is to actually not only purchase a gun, but to go through the background check process. And he does it not to poke fun at liberals, but to truly educate, because this argument that's made is that it's so easy to get a gun. It's so easy to just go to the store and buy a gun. It's complete BS. Like the process that you have to go in order to buy a gun, the waiting period, the background check, like it is a tedious process. So I mean, that's not to say like we already or we don't have any restrictions in place. We do. I think that the narratives that have been promoted by the anti-gun left, they're blind to the realities of the situation, because they use examples like for instance today, or they'll use examples like the Sandy Hook shooting or the Columbine shooting or any tragic moment to build straw men. And I know that feels terrible to even say, but they'll use it to build a straw man argument. They'll use these hyperbolic moments to go forward and try to promote a narrative that completely ignores facts and ignores the reality that what's happening, it's not the gun's fault, it's the bad people's fault. So I agree there, though, that you made the point about mental health. So give me, I guess, as a reformed liberal, you brought up the mental health issue, and I want to see what's your perspective when with regards to looking at mental health and looking at the way we deal with guns with those who have mental health issues.
Well, when I first got to Libertarian Republic, I wrote an article called "Cuckoo for Carbines: The Mental Health Gun Ban Repeal Explained." Essentially, the way it used to be is if you're the kind of person who can't control your own facilities or whatnot, you weren't allowed to own a gun. You, in fact, had to petition the government and write to them and say, I would like to own a gun for these reasons, even though I am mentally disabled. Which to me sounds like just making them do that automatically puts the onus on them to prove they're not crazy or mentally handicapped to not own a gun. But because gun right ownership is guaranteed by the Constitution, it is a right. It felt wrong to me, and it felt wrong to the ACLU and Donald Trump. So those people were on the same side, and me, which is a rarity, and I should have played the lottery that day. They all agreed that no. If you're going to tell someone they can't own a gun, that's on the government to prove it. It's not on someone to prove they should be able to. It's on the government to prove why you can't. For example, I used to date a girl who had she just had a very hard time keeping finances in order, so she'd have someone that would call her and help her and run her through finances and money and all that stuff. And she did a lot of online dating, and if she wanted to own a gun for protection, even if it's just a little pea shooter, in Massachusetts, she would have to email the government, write the government, explain why she wants to own a gun, go and then have an interview with I think it's the police chief of a given township is how it works in Massachusetts before you're given a gun. And then she could have a gun. She'd have to jump through all these hoops just to be able to protect herself. And at some point, I would imagine if you're the kind of person that has trouble managing your finances, you'd give up, So it's on the government. But regarding mental health, it's tricky because I think there's an issue, and this is going to sound like I'm advocating for big government, and maybe it does. I think it's messed up that I can go and I can shoot someone and then get 3 square meals a day, a roof over my head, and all that stuff. And I know prison is not a pretty place or whatnot, but you go there and you're provided for. Meanwhile, if you're mentally ill but you haven't committed any crime, you're out on the street with a Dunkin' Donuts cup asking for money. And worse, you're turning to drugs. Worse, you're turning to, other self-medicating materials like alcohol or something. And there's no recourse for that if you don't have money or support structure. And like being from Massachusetts, the thing about mental health is because of like post-Vatican II, like Catholic shaming kind of stuff, is that you don't talk about therapy. You don't talk about your issues because you don't want to draw attention to yourself. Being on therapy or being on medication is like, oh, you're on medication.
Right.
And it's like one of these really weird stigmas in society that like, if you break your leg, someone isn't going to be like, oh, you have a cast. What? You don't really need a cast. You can just walk that off, right? But if you have a mental health issue, if you're the kind of person prone to dark thoughts, if you're the kind of person prone to violence or something, they say, oh, you should just shake that off. You can walk that off. You don't need help for that. How long are you going to be on medication for that?
Well, let me stop right there really quick, Paul, because so I think the point you're making, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we should have a society that's more open about discussing and trying to address mental health, correct?
Yeah, and okay. Obama said something to the effect of what we have in America is sick care, not health care. Right. We only get to you when something has gone wrong. We need to get to people in the process of going wrong.
Well, with that being said, now here's the point. I think that those of us that are more Second Amendment absolutists would argue, and that is, how can you be able? Or let me rephrase that. How will you be able, as a government, to make sure that every single mental ill person in America is properly screened to the extent that we can guarantee without a doubt that they will not receive weapons? And see, that's the issue, because let's look at the guy here today, okay? He had one arrest in 2006, and other than that, and I believe it was a misdemeanor, right?
Yeah, it was battery and it was dropped.
Right. So that was the quote unquote red flag. But at the same point in time, since it was a misdemeanor and it was dropped, he, by law, is still a tax-paying American who has the right to own a gun. And he just went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs today and did this horrible act. Now, how can we... See, now this is the issue. How can we as a society, and by society I mean a government, make sure that he doesn't get a gun without infringing upon his rights at the onset? Because it almost becomes like a negative right versus a positive right. Like, he at no point during his use of his right in terms of owning a gun violated anyone's rights up to the point that he broke a law that's already in place, which is murder. You're not supposed to, well, not murder, but you're not supposed to use a deadly weapon. You're not supposed to try to harm other people. He took his right and used his right in a way that infringed upon the rights of others, therefore breaking the law. So isn't him doing that on its own his act of violating the law? I mean, how do you see the issue? It's a catch-22. Like, we can argue all day, and we want better mental health screenings, we want better mental health services, but that only gets to a certain extent until we have to have the black and white discussion. Okay, so at what point are we going to have the government go through and screen every single person and already hold them under the impression that they are guilty of having a mental health issue, that they should not have a gun? And to a certain extent, what are we going to identify as a quote-unquote mental health issue that would prevent someone from owning a gun? I mean, would it be that they believe a certain political ideology? Would it be that they have expressed, in college classes, certain rhetoric that, people might deem problematic? I mean, it gets to this slippery slope argument, which I know usually is a logical fallacy, but unfortunately in politics, slippery slope arguments turn into law. That's the precedent for a legality, is that you have something already established in law, and then that is used as a precedent to then build other laws upon it. And we see that in the Supreme Court all the time. So, I mean, I guess, what's the end game? Do we screen people for mental health at the onset and hold them as guilty of being, holding some mental health issue that would restrict them from a gun? Or do we simply look at those individuals who own guns and say, you have the right to own this gun without infringing on somebody else's right? And at that point, not only are you breaking the law, but you've lost your right.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, I think in my heart of hearts, like, the most cynical part of me says that, like, you just gotta grin and bear it, because unless you do and you are okay infringing on people's rights and infringing on people's free speech, and the government interceding, and you're saying, I think Donald Trump is an a-hole. Oh, sorry, that's not allowed. You can't have a gun. Or like these guys in England that burnt the Koran, and now they're under fire they're being charged with a hate crime, maybe.
Yep.
Like if I'm Marilyn Manson and I'm burning the Bible on stage every night at my shows, is that the kind of speech that says I'm mentally deranged and I can't own a gun?
Right.
I think and I remember reading a stat somewhere that, like, gun deaths account for such a finite amount of death in this country. It's a very small amount compared to how most people
and
die.
not only is it a finite amount in terms of how people die, but in terms of how other people harm and kill other people. Most gun deaths are self-inflicted, and that's the thing that people seem to forget. Like, we use these gun statistics as if they're the end-all and be-all of human existence, and in reality, it's a gun being used on that one person's self. So that, I mean, and let's be really, really honest with each other here. They're harming nobody but themselves. And at the fundamental basis of libertarianism, it's the right of personal ownership, meaning that you have the right to live your life so long as you harm nobody else. I mean, people give a lot of crap because of the nap, but, like, that's one of the fundamental principles of libertarianism, is not to harm other people. So, you do what you want so long as you don't hurt someone else, so long as your actions don't infringe upon someone else's rights. And honestly, like, using a gun against yourself, the only person you're truly fundamentally harming is yourself and your immediate family because of the emotional toll. But that, unfortunately, that statistic is then utilized in these anti-gun narratives as a means to ban guns, which, let's also be real, because we're running short on time, because this is just one of those issues we can go on forever. But this also opens up a can of worms in terms of truly analyzing, not just the mental health side of things at, like, the onset, but, okay, let's take it to its extreme. Let's ban X amount of guns. Let's ban this certain type of gun. Let's ban all these kind of guns. America has, I think it's like 600 million guns, some astronomical number, I believe. It might be less than that, I'm not sure, but it's in the hundreds of millions of guns. Which means that on average, each American is going to, on average, own one gun. Let's just, do the math.
Yeah.
We'll break it down. Now, at that point, you are taking a government and then trying to compensate guns. A weapon that we talked about is designed to kill, and then trying to extract these guns from an armed citizenry. That was almost like to the point of why this amendment exists, is to allow the citizens to protect themselves from a tyrannical government. So, honestly, I think that, and this is just logically looking at this, the end game that the liberals have been arguing for, which ultimately would be a society without guns, because they're going to use any example of gun violence as a means to quote unquote strengthen their argument. It's never going to end until there are no guns in this I don't even want to call it like a petri dish, if you will, of public policy. But up until that point, there's always going to be a gun death in some way, shape, or form. It's just a matter of how the gun death takes place. And the ultimate endgame to get rid of gun deaths would be to have no guns, which is a complete fantasy land, unless you want to see mass killings at an incredible scale.
Yeah, it's weird. And, like, I guess what I was trying to say before is that, like, when it comes to this kind of thing, when it comes to gun violence, like, the thing to keep in mind, as tragic as it is, The stat I think is 30,000 people a year die in America from gun violence, and I think that does include things like suicide, accidental shootings, things like that. Keep in mind, worldwide, like 6,000 people die every hour.
Hmm.
And like it's a really cold thing to say, but I think like it's a lot of effort for not a lot of reward. Like
Right.
you're gonna pry this gun from my cold dead hands is the thing the NRA likes to say. And their backs are up against the wall because they know every time someone does use a gun, they're gonna try and come for their guns,
Right.
or they're gonna try and say you can't own these guns, and it's putting the onus on the gun owners to say, well, hey man, look at how many bad apples you have. We're going to punish all of you. And that's the same exact logic that conservatives will use against Islam.
Yep.
It's
Exactly.
the same exact argument that
Exactly.
conservatives will use against African American people in the inner cities and shit. It's just this cycle of, okay, yeah, I understand what you want and why you want it. It's an emotional appeal. It's an appeal to the heart.
Of course.
When logically speaking, the amount of gun deaths in this country are very, very small compared to the amount of people that die every day
From heart
now.
disease. I mean, I wrote an
Yeah.
article, and we talked about a little bit last week. Is that I wrote an article talking about individuals who die from heart disease, or obesity related illnesses. That is the biggest killer in America, far and above smoking, far and above car accidents, far and above gun deaths, and yet we don't see liberals at all going after attacking obesity at all to the extent that they go after guns, because
Well, they do want to tax our sugary soda and our cigarettes.
Oh, right.
We're allowed to have them just as long as they're making money off of our ballooning waistlines and blackening lungs.
And let me just say, as someone who lives in the city of Philadelphia, watching the city tax, it's not at all designed to entirely get rid of obesity. That's the front that's made for. But the underlying is to fund air quote fund various projects here in the city that they argue to be a quote unquote a societal good, which I would raise my hand and say I call BS. But I digress. And this is, I mean, I unfortunately have to stop us here because we're already past like the 30-minute mark by a lot, because this is one of those topics that whenever something like this happens, the gun argument will be raised back up just because that's the nature of the beast. And unfortunately, whenever the beast gets fed, we have to address it. And unfortunately, that day is today. And it's fresh. The wound is fresh. No pun intended. That I mean, usually we're talking about this kind of stuff a couple days after it happened. I mean, this happened not even 12 hours ago. So we're still reeling from what's going on. But I speak for myself and the entire Libertarian Republic empire. Best wishes to Representative Scalise on a speedy recovery, as well as the 4 other individuals in Alexandria who were injured from this shooting today. And as we wrap up here, Paul, I just want to give you the floor. Give me your final thought for this week as we gear up towards this what looks to be a pretty nice weekend.
Yeah, happy birthday, Donald Trump.
And my mom. Come on, let's
Yeah,
be
exactly. Yeah, I
respectful to
mean,
Mama Nichols.
yeah, just be nice to one another. Like
Please,
you don't.
yeah.
It's so easy to want to get that real big dagger in, on social media or on Facebook. But like, even if you're a shit poster, like there's a person behind there,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all people and we're all in this together. There's a quote from the guy who like circled the moon. The first guy who circled the moon, he saw he saw the Earth all by itself and the vastness of space, and he said something to the effect of like, after seeing that, I just want to grab every politician by the neck and make them see this and say, listen to me, we're all in this together, and we are. So just be nice to one another and understand differing opinions doesn't mean we are different humans. We all want the same things. We all want life, liberty, prosperity, and a purpose, the pursuit of happiness.
I'll finish my final thoughts with 2 things. Number one, my tweet from this morning, which I said, number one, if you're trying to politicize this morning's Scalise shooting in Alexandria, 3 things. Number one, stop. Number 2, go home and rethink your life and priorities. Number 3, seek professional help. Because honestly, we have a far too reactionary public right now, where anything that happens, we instantly have to have some rapid analysis, and honestly, it's nothing but damaging to our discourse, our ability to accurately share information, and if anything, it helps spread misinformation, which then leads to my other LOL of the day / week. It is that Fox News, we'll end it on a funny note, I guess. Fox News has officially dropped their slogan that is fair and balanced, which I chuckled because I want to remember back to an era when they were truly fair and balanced. To which I tweeted, I'm patiently waiting now for CNN to drop their slogan, the quote, most trusted name in news. It's just...
Gosh, who is the most trusted name in news?
Honestly, I think it's us.
Maybe.
Without being biased at all, I'm pretty sure it's the Libertarian Republic. I'm just gonna shoot that out there. Actually, let's be real, and this is not at all emblematic of scientific norms and being able to accurately gauge the true nature of this survey that was conducted. But there was a survey, I believe it was, that you shared a while back that showed that we were it was 50% Republican Democrat split in terms of our overall bias as a company, but also in terms of our reliability and our credibility. It was high 90s out of 100.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing. The one I saw said we lean right, which is, I would say,
that's right, a little
true.
Bit, yeah,
but the reason we get away with that is because, again, it's in our title,
and we admit it as much.
And the most important thing is we are factually accurate.
Right.
We had a very high factually accurate rating. So even though our news may be couched in opinion, we're not changing the news to fit our opinion. Our opinion is coming from the news.
Amen.
So when we talk about Bernie Sanders, condemning the shooter, and we mention the fact that this guy worked for Bernie Sanders, we're not changing the facts to say that they shook hands at one point or that Bernie Sanders enticed this guy or
gave
whatever.
Him a hug and he told him to go ahead and do what he did today. No, we're going to be honest. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are looking for truly honest, truly I'm not gonna say nonpartisan, non-biased, because we obviously do have a little partisan leanings. If you're looking for facts, looking for credibility, go to the TLR. We got you. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you once again for joining us for the Around the Republic podcast. It's been a pleasure. I wish it was on a better day, but we take the news as it is and we report on it as we see fit. But until next week, remember, personal responsibility, economic freedom. I'm your host, Brian Nichols, signing off for Paul Meekin. We'll see you next week.